All right, I am going to go over chapter 2 of Gunfight, and let's be honest, there's a lot of information in this chapter, tons and tons and tons. But let's be clear, this is a great chapter to use for your essay, because in your essay, you're going to have to be arguing whether the United States should be harder on guns or easier on guns, and this chapter has a lot of great resources for you. I'm going to go over some key points. Let's see. So when they tried to ban handguns in Washington D.C., the amount of incidents went up. I guess it depends on who you read those, because some people said the crime went down and some people went up. And they decided to ban handguns because they said 75% of crime was happening with the handgun. And it does make sense because the handgun is small. You can hide it, right? So it's easier to rob a bank with the handgun because you could sneak into the bank rather if you had a long gun or a rifle or something like that. Let's see. And also on page 18, the second paragraph, it also talks about this. And I think this is a very, very important thing to talk about. A lot of people say that we should be harder on guns across the entire country, and that's really, really hard to do because it's hard to pass a national law against guns, and the reason why is the Second Amendment, and the Second Amendment says shall not be infringed. However, and also the states can have their own laws. So, for example, California has very strict laws on guns, but Arizona has a lot easier laws on guns. Texas, I believe you could have a gun in your car and drink beer in your car. So every state is different, and if you try to pass laws for all 50 states, it's very, very hard. And the issue that you have is if you pass a law in one state, then somebody can go to another state and buy a gun. And this was happening in D.C., where they said that they banned handguns in the city. However, 80% of the guns they were finding were purchased in other states, like Virginia and things like that. So the issue with gun control really works like this. If you try to ban a gun or pass gun control legislation in a city or a state, people can just go across the state and get a gun. And so it's really, really hard to practice this. And I know that was an issue with, there was a football player. He played for the New York Giants. His name was Plaxico Burress. And he was in a nightclub, and he had a gun. And he was walking up the stairs, and the gun was in his belt. And as he was walking up the stairs, the gun fell out of his belt, fell on the ground, and he shot himself. And Plaxico Burress went to prison, and you're like, how can you go to prison for shooting yourself, right? How does that make sense? But the reason why he got in trouble is New York, you weren't allowed to have handguns. And also, they found out that the gun was purchased in other states, it wasn't registered and things like that. So that's evidence that if you try to pass gun laws in one state or one city, then people can just go somewhere else to buy those guns. Another really good argument, and this chapter really focuses on gun control and why it's hard to pass gun control, and it's a great chapter. I love it. One of the reasons why, and let me just illustrate this, I think this is a hard paper topic, but it has to be brought up. Prohibition does not work in the United States because people don't listen. And if you think about it, how many of you guys drive 65? Like, I'm just going to drive 65. Very few people drive 65, right? Or I remember when they banned cell phones. They banned cell phones, talking on your cell phone in your car. The day after that in California, I was driving around and all these people were in their cars. We're going through coronavirus right now. We're supposed to stay indoors. How many people are staying indoors? So I think it's fair to say Americans don't listen. We're very, very rebellious. So if you try to pass a law to take away everybody's guns, I don't think it would work because people don't listen. They just don't listen. And our chapter really illustrates that. And just to also talk about this, I think it would be the hardest job the scariest job ever, if you had to go door to door, knock on somebody's door and ask them for their gun. That would not be a fun job. You would probably get shot. So to try to take away people's guns, I think would be really, really hard. And in other countries like Australia, like in Great Britain, like in New Zealand, they were able to take guns away from people. But let's be clear, they didn't have as many guns or as many people as the United States have. We have a lot of people, we have a lot of guns. So to try to take guns away from the United States is very, very hard. I'm reading page 20, the second paragraph where it says, in 1989, California passed a law requiring all assault weapons be registered within a year. By the end of that time, less than 20% of people registered their guns. So people didn't listen. They didn't listen. 80% of people didn't listen. And in Illinois, 73% said they would not comply with the law requiring them to turn in their guns. So again, people really don't listen. So if you try to pass a law, it doesn't mean people are going to listen anyways. And I think that's a great point. Also, when we try to ban alcohol, because for a variety of reasons, we banned alcohol in the late 1920s, 1930s, and it didn't work. People were drinking more than ever before, and people loved the liquor. They didn't listen. They were finding ways to make alcohol in their bathtubs and things like that. So I think if you try to tell people not to do something, they're going to do it more. So I agree with the author that prohibition does not work in this country. The same thing with drugs. We had the war on drugs. We told people don't use drugs, and it's gotten to the point where we've had to legalize drugs because people didn't listen. We legalized marijuana in California just a couple years ago because nobody was listening. So people don't listen, and I think that's fair. There's a lot of points, and I want to kind of skip around. I want to get into some key points that I really, really like from this chapter. On page 29, how many people are shot and killed in this country, in the United States, every year? Basically, you have about 30,000 people who are shot and killed every year, which is a lot. That's a whole lot of people. So in Mexico, when they had the cartels from 2006 to 2004 to 2008, you had over 60,000 people killed in the span of 4 years. In our country, you have 60,000 people killed in 2 years, which is a lot. It's a whole lot of people dying. But if you look at it, and our book clarifies it, that half of those fatalities are suicides. Well, let me back up a little bit. Let me say this. If you want to break down those numbers, 30,000. So on any given day, you have about 286 people being shot in the United States. 286, and you have about 80 people who are killed by guns every single day in this country. But as our book points out, half of those are suicide. So about 15,000 people are killed by suicide every year with guns, and about 40 people are killed every day suicide with guns. So let's be clear, right? It's not all shootouts and crime related. Sometimes it's suicide. And I think this is a good paper argument, where it works like this. You could say that if we took guns away, people would still find a way to kill themselves. And I know this is a morbid topic, but it's part of what we need to talk about. I think that's fair. If somebody wants to kill themselves, they're going to find another way. They're going to poison themselves or something terrible, right? But I also see the other side, too, that using a gun to kill yourself is a lot easier than other things. And typically, men kill themselves with guns more than women. So, for example, they've done studies that women are more likely to use pills to kill themselves, and men are more likely to use guns. And I think that if you took a pill, you have time to realize, hey, I did something wrong. I'm going to call the paramedics. But if you have a gun and you pull that trigger, you don't have a lot of time. If you're about to jump over a bridge, you're stopping traffic. People are yelling at you. Police are helicoptering above saying, don't jump, and you have time to think about it. Where usually if you have a gun, you're in your house all alone. You don't have a lot of time to think about it. So maybe if we made it harder to get guns, maybe the suicide rate would go down. Or maybe it wouldn't, but I think that's a very, very good paper topic for us. I'm going to go backwards again. I want to go to a stat that's on page 21. The very bottom of the page, it says that estimates say that there are between 100,000 to 2.5 million defensive uses of guns per year. And a defensive use of a gun works like this. It means you used a gun to protect yourself. So let's say you were in your home, somebody broke in, and you used a gun and you scared them away. That would be a defensive use of a gun, right? Now, this is interesting because I think those numbers are crazy. 100,000 to 2.5 million, like that, those are such a vast array of numbers. I don't know how they came up with this. I think it's also important to ask yourself, I mean, some of you guys may have been in the military, some of you guys may be police, so that this question may not apply to you, but how many people have ever used their guns to protect themselves? Usually when I ask this to a classroom, maybe 1 or 2 people know someone who's protected themselves with a gun, but I think it's fair to say that a lot more people are killed by guns and save their lives by guns. Also, a couple other things. I would say that if you do use a gun to protect yourself, you probably aren't going to go on the news. They're not going to